On behalf of Asia Society Seattle, welcome to our event on Trade for an Inclusive Economy, Women in Trade. We have a powerhouse lineup of speakers for you with experts on trade, leaders from Amazon, Boeing, and the Port of Tacoma. Welcome to all of you. And welcome to our audience and our Asia Society Seattle Advisory Council members, Mark Berger and Christy Heim. Several of you are new to Asia Society in our audience. Our global mission is to build bridges and understanding between Asia and the United States. Our aim is to navigate shared futures, which is increasingly difficult these days, but aligns perfectly with our programming and the upcoming APEC meetings here in Seattle. I'm Margaret Conley, the Executive Director of Asia Society Northern California and Seattle. I'm here with Man Wong, who is based in Seattle as our Director of Programs. A warm welcome to Wendy Cutler, who's on our global team. She's Vice President of our Asia Society Policy Institute and head of our Washington, D.C. office. We are thrilled about our Seattle Center launch, and we're looking forward to seeing much more of you throughout the years to come. For our program format, first, you're going to hear from Rebecca Sta Maria. She's the Executive Director of the APEC Secretariat, and she's based in Singapore, so we're very pleased to have her with us. She's going to share the latest on all the moving parts of the APEC meetings that are happening in Seattle and what's going to happen as we get ready for the meetings that are going to culminate in San Francisco in November. Then we're going to hear a few words from our venue host, Dorsey and Whitney, managing partner, Larry Ward, and then we'll go into our panel discussion with our 5 special guest expert speakers. All of their bios are on our website, and I will introduce them shortly. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so please raise your hand if you have a question. Dorothy, our moderator, will call on you. Wait for a microphone, and please introduce yourself before you ask your question. This event is on the record. We are recording, and the video will be posted on our website in Seattle. Please take a moment to silence your phones. We'll have until 12:30 for the program, and then we have a networking session until 1 o'clock. We'll have some food afterwards, so please enjoy that. Let's go ahead and get started with Rebecca Sta Maria, Executive Director of the APEC Secretariat.
Thank you, Margaret. Good morning, everybody. A special shout out to Wendy, because we go back some ways, and morning friends from the Asia Society. I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to be here in person. We've tried a few times, but couldn't manage our schedule. So I'm so glad to be here. It's such an honor to be invited to this Women in Trade event. I spent much of my time in the Malaysian civil service at the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. So of course, this is really right up my street. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm here in Seattle for the APEC senior officials cluster of meetings. The US has structured it very differently from other years. They've put them in clusters. So this time in Seattle, it's a whole month. All of us are here. There are like 2,000 odd folks in town. And besides the officials meetings, the working group meetings, the workshops, we also have 6 ministerials. We're done with 3. We've got 3 more to go. We've done with the Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum, the Food Security Ministerial, the Health Ministerial. Going forward, we will have the Energy Ministerial, the SME Ministerial, and the Women and the Economy Forum. And interestingly, this year also, we have a joint ministerial of the SME ministers and the women ministers. So that's really progress, really novel for us at APEC. I'm going to focus, while I speak about, I inform you about what's happening this month, I will also have a focus on Women and the Economy Forum. This month, the reason we have what the US has done is really cluster this, and the running theme for this month is the digital month. So you have a lot of discussions, a lot of workshops on the digital transformation that's required, AI discussions, digital economy. So there's a lot of those discussions happening at the summit. Now, let me begin again with an overview of the US year. The theme guiding our work is creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. The priorities based on the APEC Putrajaya vision and the Aotearoa plan of action are encapsulated in US year in 3 words: interconnected, innovative, and inclusive. So we see this panning out the whole year. this particular meeting, this particular month, you will see a focus on inclusive, very strong focus on the inclusive aspects, covering women, MSMEs, medium, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and also some discussions on indigenous peoples. And of course, weaving through this is the digital transformation that's required in all of our work. Sustainability is also featured high on the agenda. Coming to Women and the Economy Forum, I'd just like to take us back and put it in some historical context. We've been doing this for the longest time, and as they say, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And if you track what we've been doing in APEC, you'll see this. In 1996, leaders committed to put in special emphasis on the full participation of women and youth. So you go forward and you go forward and you go forward, and you come to 2011 when the US first hosted APEC. And there, really forced us to think through how to mainstream women in the economy. And it took us some time before we got to 2019 when Chile then really, got us thinking about, it's good to have rhetoric, but you need to ground it. So in the year when Chile hosted in 2019, they just a backtrack. US established a policy partnership on women and the economy. So there were some discussions, but how we can just let discussions go on and on. So in Chile's year, we rounded it into we framed it around the La Serena roadmap for women and inclusive growth. And that has very specific targets and objectives that we need to take forward. And very important is because we have a way of tracking it, we also at the Secretariat, the Policy Support Unit has a dashboard on women and the economy. So there we have a number of indicators that we track. And what we're seeing is, yes, there is will and commitment to advance women's economic empowerment within the region, but alongside this, there are stubborn policy and data gaps, as well as social cultural norms that serve to take us back to when we started in 1996. So a lot of work that still needs to be done. We have this, like I said, a very valuable tool now alongside the La Serena roadmap. It's the Women and the Economy dashboard. This complements what we're doing under the La Serena roadmap, and the progress is tracked and we report it. So this year is the year we'll be reporting both the progress on the La Serena roadmap as well as the dashboard. Now, I can't provide details of the dashboard to you yet because we are presenting it to the ministers. But let me just say that we will be highlighting the fact that even as we made progress in some areas, there are still policy issues, data gaps, and discriminatory attitudes and norms that have persisted over the last few decades. One example is access to credit. The good news is that women in the region have formal, financial, and mobile money accounts, and we do see increased uptake in digital financial services and online platforms. But on the other hand, there are APEC economies that do not have laws mandating non-discrimination in credit access based on sex. We will also be highlighting to ministers the need for ensuring that economies generate sex disaggregated data. And this is something we've been talking for years, so that we can make better informed and well-targeted, tailored policy interventions. In addition, we will also be providing findings on age-old gender discrimination laws, attitudes, social norms, and practices that hinder women's progress across various sectors, restricting their ability to contribute to society and the economy. One economy, for example, a woman, if she's married to a foreigner, her children don't get automatic citizenship. But if the man marries a foreigner, that child gets automatic citizenship. So still, those things, irritating, really frustrating. And we've been putting this on the agenda for the longest time. We need to make sure that, there's a lot of rhetoric about equality and parity, but not enough work is still being done. So we need to keep highlighting it. We need to call it out every time we meet. And that's the other aspect is ensuring, the rhetoric around STEM, women's participation in STEM. And again, there's work that's being done in APEC, but in different fora. So we need to get them to talk to each other. For example, the Policy Partnership on Science and Technology and Innovation has been doing work on women in STEM. They've just come up with indicators to track this women in STEM, because there's issues around definition and data collection. While that's going on, the Policy Partnership on Women and the Economy also talking about, women's participation in STEM. So there is this need to make sure that this information is even shared among APEC fora. So that's the role of the Secretariat. We sit in all these meetings, gather all this information that's being done, all this work that's being done, and then making sure that the different folks talk to each other. So let me just end on some more positive note. PPWE, the Policy Partnership of Women and the Economy, must be commended for ensuring a platform for members to discuss challenges in advancing women's economic empowerment in APEC. In fact, they have expanded their work to encourage other fora to also integrate the gender element, the gender perspective in their projects and in their discussions. The cross-fora collaboration, as I said, is really what matters when we're talking about women's economic empowerment. So this year, I'm really pleased that the US has taken that important step. In your year, when you hosted 2011, you led to the creation of the PPWE, and this year you started it again, showing the commitment of the US to this very important subject by having the SME Ministerial together with the Women's Ministerial. So really pushing forward the ideas that, these issues cannot be discussed in isolation. You can't have one group just talking about women, whereas it also has implications on other parts. And that's a message that we really need to get through in the work that we're doing. So much rhetoric, we need to get down to getting it done. So on that note, I'll leave it to you. Thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca, for taking the time to speak with us and for the incredible work you do. I don't know how you keep track of all these initiatives, and we are grateful for your leadership. We also have a virtual audience joining us live today from Northern California. We have a special guest, our Vice Chair Global of Asia Society, Lulu Wong. We look forward to her participation and to all the questions we get from our online audience. And now a few words from our host, from Dorsey Whitney, the head of this beautiful, beautiful office, Larry Ward.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a few minutes to welcome everybody to our office today. It's an honor to host today's presentation. Dorsey has long had a presence in Asia. We currently have offices in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, and we were one of the very first US law firms to actually establish a presence in Asia. So we're very excited for today's discussion. My own practice focuses on US national security law, so very closely related to the topics that are going to be discussed today. Please do enjoy our space. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask any of the folks at the reception desk. And thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much, Larry. And we'd like to put the request in now for access to all of your offices around the world. Let's go to our next section here, our panel, 5 amazing leaders. Wendy Cutler, Vice President at the Asia Society Policy Institute. Kristen Ang, Port of Tacoma Commissioner. Sherry Carberry, President of Boeing China. Claire O'Donnell, Director for the Selling Partner Empowerment Communities and Trust Organization at Amazon. And moderating today is Dorothy Dwoskin, trade expert and negotiator. All of their extensive bios are on our website. At the end, again, we'll have time for questions, so get those in early. Dorothy, thank you very much for moderating.
It's really a pleasure to be here. I have to say, this is my 3rd time around being involved in APEC. I was here when Bill Clinton first hosted the first leaders meeting, and we actually had a really phenomenal trade ministers meeting in this building. Anyway, we thought maybe it would be a good idea to get to know a little bit about our panelists in terms of them talking about their career trajectories and a special look on what you've done to make progress on gender issues in the workplace. So Wendy, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Kristen, and then then Sherry, then Claire. There you go. There's a button there.
Well, thank you very much. It's really my pleasure to be here. And if one thing Dorsey could work on, can you get rid of the clouds? I really want to see those mountains.
I'm sorry I didn't bring the weather.
Well, it's really my pleasure, being from the Asia Society, to be in an event at our new center in Seattle. And when I heard that we're going to be opening a center here, I was quite excited because a lot's going on here in the international trade space. So I hope to get back here. I'm also just thrilled that Rebecca Sta Maria could join us. I mean, Rebecca's so humble. This woman is probably the busiest woman in Seattle right now. She just mentioned some of the meetings that are taking place, but there's 21 economies of APEC. They're all sending folks here for all these different issue areas. And Rebecca, along with the host, the US, is kind of running the show. So thank you so much for taking the time out. And actually, you educated me, because I thought the United States started the women's work in APEC in 2011 with the Women and Economy Forum, but now I just learned it started in 1996. So a lot of important work going on in APEC. And just a special shout out to Margaret Connolly and to Man Weng, doing an amazing job here, and you can ask me to come back. And finally, I feel like I'm in some award ceremony. Dorothy Boskin, and Dorothy and I will talk more. We worked together for a long time at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. And there were times when I would run to her office when I thought the world was falling apart. And she was a good friend and a good colleague and got me back on my feet. So thank you, Dorothy. And hopefully you'll do that today in the panel if I need it. So what got me interested in this space is pretty simple. As I mentioned, I worked at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative for 28 years, largely negotiated with Asian countries. And guess what? I'd go to the negotiating table, and our side would have a number of women on the delegation, but on the other side of the table, they're mainly men. Over time, this began to change, and it's really changing now. But what I'm finding is that while there are a lot of young women coming into the ranks of foreign governments, particularly in Japan and Korea, two of the countries I spent most of my time with, there are not a lot of senior level women in those organizations. So they don't really have anyone to look to. They're kind of navigating this on their own. And frankly, they're experiencing a lot of challenges. And so what I wanted to do when I got to the Asia Society was to see how I could help, how I could give back. And I've set up this program now, which is really taking off, inviting small groups of women from Asia, from different parts of Asia, including a successful trip we had with a group of ASEAN women from 8 different countries, 14 women. None of them knew each other, or maybe they knew each other through other people. And just to spend a week with them, going to Washington, New York, and Silicon Valley, and watching them kind of network among themselves, build those bonds as we taught them about US trade policy. We briefed them about emerging issues in trade, how to sharpen their trade negotiating skills, as well as how to cope with the challenges in the workplace. An extremely kind of gratifying program we have going, and one that's taking off. And so for me, this has been probably one of the highlights of my work at the Asia Society. And I'll conclude with this. It's interesting because the culture that I grew up in at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, I didn't feel a lot of discrimination in that building. There were a lot of women, including senior women, female colleagues, and all very supportive. But it was when I went to the international space that's when I started feeling a bit different. And again, a need to kind of prove myself. And I felt as a woman, I was often tested more at the negotiating table than my male colleagues.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. So Sherry, you want to?
Sure. So first, I'm really honored to be here. So thanks for including me in this. So I'll just start with, I grew up an Army brat. My dad was an aviator. I flew mostly helicopters. So as a young child, I grew up, around airplanes and air bases and air shows. And what I didn't appreciate till much later is how uncommon my experiences were to other girls outside the United States, and predominantly in Asia and specifically China, which is where I currently work and live. And so that taught me a lot. But I always wanted to be an astronaut. But I didn't have the high math skills and the physics capabilities. So I just turned to, got my degree in finance and economics and an MBA. But I always wanted to work at Boeing because it was this aviation aerospace juggernaut that took people to space, connected people around the world. And fortunately, I got on at Boeing, which is where I've been for 34 and a half years. And, I've done everything. I started in finance, but as a non-STEM person, I moved through all the different ranks in sales and marketing and investor relations and strategy. I got to run our largest global services business, which took me to Asia a lot. And then now the president of Boeing China. And when I reflect on it, aerospace is mostly a male-dominated industry, and I had to work really hard. And I was usually the only woman at a table or in a meeting. But I was successful first because I worked really, really hard. But I also had male advocates. And I say that now without back then understanding what that was. They weren't mentors, they were advocates. They proactively took action and moved me around and gave me experiences that I probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So as I look back on what I've done over the last couple of decades, it's trying to be that same advocate for other women, because being a mentor just isn't enough. And so that's kind of why now I'm in this mode of massively giving back through being a strong advocate.
Great. Thanks. Kristen?
Well, good morning, all. Thank you for being here. I'm Kristen Eng. I am the Port of Tacoma Commissioner and Northwest Seaport Alliance Managing Member. And if you're wondering what that is, that's just setting policy, investment, and strategy for our ports and the economic development of Tacoma Pierce County. I'm also on the board of the Washington Council of International Trade. My background is business and law. However, that's not how I got my position. There was some unrest in Tacoma Pierce County with regards to environmental issues and tribal sovereignty and with the Puyallup tribe. It cost less than a Katy Perry ticket and likely a Taylor Swift ticket. And I decided to run for office last hour. And lo and behold, I went from the streets to the seat because I'm not going to protest and walk 60 miles. I'm just going to take a seat at the commission, which is male dominated. I realized that even more attending a lot of these meetings. And I guess I made history as the first person of color with the historical endorsement of the Puyallup tribe that has had tensions with the port probably ever since its beginning, because trade has not always been fair to everyone, and it's not always been inclusive and innovative. And so my election was really hard fought in 2019, and it was a battle because it was a new person, a new perspective, and it was a shock to the system. Because I was running on environmental justice, inclusion, innovation, everything that she was talking about so eloquently. And that really blew everyone's minds away because people were starting to talk about equity, talking about diversity, inclusion, environmental justice, sustainability, collaborating with the tribes, including more of our community and our students and our schools into the economy. And that was a change. For me, that was like, well, duh. But that was the change. And I got elected. But I wasn't looking at just one election. I wanted transformation. So I actually help a lot of people get elected and help women get elected, and with women organizations. Now our City of Tacoma Council is majority women. There are more women in our state legislatures. I didn't just stop with mine election. I was looking to change the political landscape of our area, our region, because I saw some things when I was running that I was not too happy about. And I just wanted that change. And I knew that wasn't going to be done by just one seat. It needed to be an entire ecosystem. And so that's how I got here. Of course, I've also take care of port business, but I knew that port business is affected by the outside of the system, and I wanted to change a lot of things.
Great, very impressive. And Claire?
Tough act to follow with that one. So hi, everybody. My name is Claire O'Donnell. I currently work at Amazon. Similar to Sherry, I don't have a background in technology. I was the first person in my family to go to university. I studied history and politics, which it was an interesting segue into big tech. Although I'm very good at writing white papers, which is something we use a lot at Amazon, and I think is very common in the policy world as well. So history equipped me for that. And I worked in consulting for a while. When I was working in consulting, I worked on a mine in South Africa. There were 6 women who worked on a mine of 30,000 people. So I experienced being the only and kind of gender issues in a very different way than I probably had ever done so before. And it really left a big impression on me. And so I always remember this kind of mentor who said something that has stuck with me ever since, of as a woman, as you're climbing the ladder, do you want to be the woman who kind of stamps down with her high heels and keeps the women behind you from coming up? Or do you want to be the woman who turns around and gives them a helping hand and helps bring as many women up the ladder as possible? And that is something that has really kind of stuck with me, both in my career in terms of mentoring, being able to kind of give back, see more women leaders at the table. It's so important to not be the only, and to have that environment of inclusivity. And then in my current role at Amazon, I lead a number of programs, many of which are focused on empowering small and underserved businesses. And in particular, something that we kind of focus on for women-owned businesses is the importance of community, which I've certainly personally lived myself, and the importance of that community of women who have kind of supported me and helped me up that ladder. And then I, in turn, can hopefully pass that along.
Great, thanks very much. So 2 seconds about me. I am a recovering trade negotiator. I spent about as much time at USTR as Wendy did, and then I was out in the private sector. And I will say that at USTR, there wasn't an issue of discrimination. I mean, the people in leadership positions were women. That was never really a big problem. You just, everybody worked really hard. And if you didn't work hard, you didn't stay there. It was, I think, a good learning experience. But on the other side, I did a lot of international work as well, mostly first in the GATT and then the WTO. And I can remember one of my colleagues said, there's not a single woman who chairs one of these committees in the GATT. So I was the very first chair of a GATT committee on import licensing. I had no idea what I was doing. People kept shoving papers at me and chairing this meeting. And these very, very bright, mostly men, would make all of these rambling statements, and I'd have to kind of pull all the threads together. So it was a learning experience. But as like the lead negotiator in a lot of negotiations internationally, you just kind of went with it. You had more women on your team. My lawyers, for the most part, were women and pretty fierce. And finally, I think, it took off. So Tsai Ing-wen, who is now a leader, president in Taiwan, was the lead lawyer for the negotiation when Taiwan first started its accession to the WTO. She broke all of the rules. She helped develop a model, and I think it's it's great to see that some of these people actually, went on to do really wonderful things. Same thing with the trade minister from Albania, who used to, take an ox cart to get a plane to come to the negotiations. So I don't think that the international side is as advanced, and I think it's a problem. And I think, APEC is probably one of the best places to make a difference and to take some of our learnings and help Rebecca and her colleagues move forward. So Kristen, that leads me to you, because I know you mentioned the tribes and what you've done specifically to help engage women and to have a better relationship between the port and the tribes. Are there some things that?
Well, there's formal consultation and meeting with them daily, but it's also the attitude. It's the attitude and the culture and how you approach things. I think one thing that they were telling me is that it's because they know my heart and they know my intentions. That when I think about business, it's the benefit of all parties. And they know that. And that I'm committed and they can trust me. Sometimes you have all this data, and I am data driven, but projects and accomplishments are at the speed of trust. And if you don't have that, that's not going to happen. In fact, you'll have a lot of conflict. And so for me, it was just about always showing up at their events or speaking with them, and always be mindful of the history. We're not starting at just the very beginning of zero. There has been a history where they were taken advantage of. People were killed. There is a historical legacy of contaminated pollution in which it's a heartache for them, because for them, the land is interconnected to who they are. And for me, I think it is because I do have an Asian immigrant background. Asian politicians are kind of rare in our area, and also being LGBTQ, all these different things that can make me relate to some of the communities that are marginalized and make them feel comfortable to approach. I think it's always coming at it from humility and starting over and over. Even if you say like, well, we've already had a meeting, they didn't want to meet. Well, are you just going to stop at one? Because they're always going to be here. And we hope the port will always be here as well. And so this relationship must heal, it must get better, and it can't just be some contract that you signed back in 1990, the largest land claim settlement, because relationships change, times change. So these relationships must adapt with it. And from conflict to 4 years ago, we have done habitat restoration, 20 acres. We are also in talks about a new terminal, about port business. We actually leased land from them to accommodate our record-setting break bulk business, as well as we couldn't do our 253 Maritime Skill Center and some of the developments that are happening now without their approval, because if they protest against this project is over and our community is worse for it. But we have to be careful about cultural resources and this relationship about what we say and, of course, how we do things, because it's not just what we print. They know what is the intention, what is the feeling behind it. And this is one thing I learned. Emotional intelligence actually accomplished more things. I was always taught like the math, all these different things, but the things that actually got me here to this seat, that made these things successful, or at least got us further than we would have at the port, was actually emotional intelligence and the collaboration and developing the relationships more than the high scores and the academic scholarships. That wasn't it. It was the building of relationships.
Thanks so much. So Sherry, you talked already about the aviation sector and it not being a women-driven sector. And so you've had a lot of experience in Asia, particularly in moving forward with other programs that Boeing was involved in for women. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience and what you learned from that?
Sure. Thanks, Dorothy. So I will say, I hope this isn't a commercial, but I am very proud of what Boeing has been doing in terms of accelerating investment for STEM. And I will speak mostly to China, but it's all been focused on, trying to drive a pipeline for more women representation. And in China, we have various levels of activities. And at the primary level, elementary school level, we have this program since 2009 called Soaring with Your Dream, where we just bring basic STEM education to the kids in this fun and interactive way. And we'll take it to the impoverished areas of China. And it's amazing to see these kids. And it's like what I said in the very beginning, many of these kids have never seen an airplane. So they're out in a rural area. There's no airports. There's no little airplanes. If you look up, you don't see anything. There might be an airplane that's 40,000 feet in the air, but you don't see it, right? So exposing them at a young age, I think, is very powerful. Middle school, we have a robotics first activity where the teams get together and build a robot to do certain things, and they compete at the country level and then even at a global level. And then just this year, we opened up our very first aviation high school classroom in Beijing, where kids can take this elective class where they learn about aviation, they do experiments, they build flight plans, and then they get in a simulator and get to test their skills. And then, of course, at the university level, very engaged in aviation clubs and scholarships. And I think when I look back at it, across the board, we have about a 40 to 50% representation of women or girls in all of those activities. And when you get them young and you see them sitting across from the boy, they're just as engaged, they're just as confident, they're just as curious. And I think when you get them young, you can keep them. And I say that because then at the Beijing office or the Boeing office in China, we have about 44% of our employees are women. And they're amazing, but very few of them are in the executive or management ranks. They've all got bachelor's degrees. Some of them have master's degrees and PhDs, but they just never seem to get out of that worker role. And when I really looked at what the obstacles were in China, you see lack of role model, lack of mentoring, and lack of advocacy. And when I think about a role model, as Wendy said, there are very few senior women in the Chinese government, very few senior women just in business. Boeing's been in China for 50 years. I'm the first female president of Boeing China. Frankly, I was the first female of any of our international countries. And so there's just not the role models. And I'll give one quick example. When I would get there and we'd have team meetings or big meetings in our conference room, I noticed that none of the women would sit at the table, none. They'd all sit in the back in the chairs and be very quiet. And so I started telling them, when everyone that would walk in, you're a woman, you're sitting at the table. And you're not just sitting at the table, you're going to ask a question, you're going to be prepared, you're going to engage. And it took a while, but I'll tell you now, if you were to come to our office and you come on time, you're not getting a seat at the table because it's all the women are there. And it really has had a powerful impact. And then just in terms of individuals, what I do is I find those ones that clearly should be further along than they are. And I take the time, because you can't mentor everybody, mentoring them, but then being their advocate, helping them build their career plan, build their confidence, find their voice, and then they just earn the job and they get those promotions. And once you do a few of them, it starts to snowball. And if you were to come to our office today, the women are empowered, they are excited. But I'll tell you, in China, women are everything. They're the homemaker, they're the mom, they're the dad, they take care of the parents on both sides of the family in some cases, and they're expected to work and help bring in the family finances. And so I'm shocked, and I hope this doesn't sound too bad, but I'm shocked how much the spouses don't play a more active role. And it's a cultural thing. And it's something that's always going to be there, but I'm so proud of the women that are there now. They're confident, they're growing, and that's what I love to see.
Very interesting. So Claire, you have a big role in women's empowerment in looking at small business. And that obviously seems to be an area where there are a lot more opportunities for women. What can you tell us about women's empowerment in your space?
Yeah, so working at Amazon, many of you probably shop on Amazon store. You may or may not know that more than 60% of our sales are from independent sellers, and most of them are small and medium-sized businesses. And so these businesses, they're not just at the heart of the local economies, but they're also exporting. More than 260 million products were exported by Amazon's independent sellers last year. And I think there's a unique opportunity for women with that. We've seen our highest sales growth in rural areas, which tends to be mostly women in the US. And so what I hear from women entrepreneurs, women small businesses is there's three challenges: access to capital, access to community, and access to education. And so for us, we really focus in different ways on all three of those. On the capital side, we have Amazon Lending, and we have a partnership with Lendistry where we're particularly focused on small and underserved businesses and making sure that they're getting competitive rates, but they're also getting the funding they need. And, I hear from a lot of our independent sellers that is what enables them to go sell internationally, right? Is you need a capital injection, and it's important. The second one on community, we do a bunch of things both online. We have an online community for our sellers. We have a group for women, as well as offline. We have big seller conferences. We try and bring women-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses and military-owned businesses kind of together as a part of that to help them build that village. Being an entrepreneur, it's lonely. And so that community that you can tap into is really important. You're not just only sitting at a conference table, you're sitting alone in your house trying to figure out how to sell your products effectively. And then finally, education. Whether you're just starting out or you're a more mature business that's ready to sell internationally, we have a range of educational offerings. We have hundreds of thousands of hours of free educational content that are available to businesses and entrepreneurs. And we actually just last year announced a partnership with US Commerce around Go Global, which is particularly focused on educational resources to help make it easier for small US businesses to go export and sell internationally. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about: is capital, community, education, and kind of how do we bridge the gap in particular for underserved businesses on each of those.
Great. Thanks very much. So Wendy, here we are talking about trade. So I'm going to turn to you and as a trade negotiator here to help us understand the best ways trade agreements and trade negotiations can help move the needle on women's empowerment, both here in the US and abroad. And what makes the most sense for driving success in the region? Is it digital inclusion? Is it STEM? Is it doing more in small business? I mean, I know trade agreements and finance are kind of not usually put together for good reasons, but maybe you can speak to all of that for us.
Yeah, so the importance of engaging women more in trade is it's becoming more and more a spotlight of not only trade agreements, but also for organizations like APEC and like the World Trade Organization. And it seems to me there are kind of two different approaches in trade agreements and these initiatives in dealing with gender issues. One is just to have like we call it a dedicated chapter out of 25 chapters in a trade agreement. There's one on labor and one on intellectual property and one on customs. You're seeing more and more in trade agreements a special chapter on inclusiveness, sometimes a special chapter on gender. And in those chapters, and in fact, this morning early, I went to reread one just to refresh my memory. And, they're very procedural. They affirm the importance of inclusiveness, affirm the importance of non-discrimination, et cetera. They promote cooperation activities, they have committees, et cetera. And all of that's important. But I think equally important are these other chapters in trade agreements, like on small and medium-sized enterprises, or on customs, where the focus is getting rid of red tape and making it easier to trade, on digital trade, particularly the trade facilitation provisions, which more and more allow kind of like a one-stop shop using electronic forms. All of this makes it easier to trade. And when 95% of the customers in the world are outside of the United States, there's an enormous economic opportunity for everyone, including women. And so again, I think trade agreements and initiatives like APEC and the WTO have tried to approach this issue from both sides.
So just on the whole STEM question, because I know APEC has struggled with that. I know when I was on the ABAC with Peggy Johnson, we actually taught everybody how to code at an ABAC meeting. Do you think that there is more that can be done on the digital side in terms of specifics?
Well, absolutely. And, when people talk, one hand, I just said digitization is really an opportunity for women and kind of, folks that aren't, as integrated in the global community. But it can also be, have negative impacts as well. And, in certain least developed countries, we even see the gap between, digital skills between men and women widening. And so I think that there needs to be an increased focus on narrowing this gap, upskilling on STEM, on digital for women and other underrepresented communities, and also just ongoing efforts to upskill it as well. And I think that's one area where APEC is playing a role. The Biden Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Initiative is also focused on this. Secretary Raimondo, about 6 months ago, announced a public-private partnership on upskilling in these areas for women and girls. And so I think increasingly this is going to become important. And I think for an organization like APEC, this is very practical. And this is something that I think with 21 economies participating, this is something that they can help push forward collectively.
Okay, ladies. So we've had a pretty rich discussion. Before we open it up for questions, I want to ask you 3 questions, and maybe you can give your thoughts on one of them, 2 of them, all of them, none of them. But anyway, so the first one is, everybody's had a challenge as a woman navigating in areas where women aren't well represented, or perhaps men prefer not to hear a woman's voice. So are there some specifics that you might recommend in terms of overcoming them? So overcoming the challenges. What advice do you want to give women as they seek to advance in their careers? And then thirdly, and Wendy spoke to this a little bit, what can APEC do to be most impactful on empowering women and making progress on gender equality? So one of them, all of them, none of them. We'll just kind of go down the row and
Maybe we should go down that road first.
Okay, Claire, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'll take the one on kind of challenges and advice, kind of taking 2 of them and combining. I think, a common challenge that I hear many women in my network have encountered is this sort of narrower band for women of kind of how we are expected to behave and to show up. Are you too aggressive or too bossy? Or are you too quiet or too shy? I personally have never had that one really. And it's tricky. And I think you have to acknowledge it and accept it. And obviously let's look to change it over time. And I think getting more senior women leaders in place is what will help us change it. But I think one piece of advice that I would have is, I see a lot of women come to me and they're not always asking for what they want. And I think the power of the only answer to the question that you don't ask is no. And I don't observe the same thing, as I look at my male mentees, for example, that they're never afraid of asking. And so I think there's something for women of what is it you want? What is it you need? And go ask for it. And I think that also equally applies to our women entrepreneurs, to small business owners, which is, what do you need to go expand your business. How do you get after it? Like, go ask for it, go negotiate for it. And I think that's really, really powerful.
Well, I think I'll stick on the same theme as Claire. What I would add is, at least where I grew up, is like you have to learn early on to have thick skin. And if you don't have thick skin, it gets really hard to survive, right? Because everything you take personally, everything is, you're defeated. And so have the thick skin, but then also, and Claire, you kind of touched on it before, have a network of women that you can go to. And it doesn't have to be women, it could be men as well. Just a network of people you trust, that when you're having those tough times, they can help lift you up and give you that strength you need to keep moving forward. It's something that's carried me forward, and I don't always follow it, but I will say that it's very powerful to have that.
So I want to know, is Sherry looking at my little pad here?
I'll put my glasses on.
Because two of the three things that you said were right on my list. And it's the thick skin. And it's funny when I train these Asian women, I use that phrase, like develop thick skin. And they're like, what does that mean? And I try to explain, like, just don't personalize things. Early on in my career, I was negotiating with a Japanese fellow, and he was so rude to me. And that whole session was just so terrible. And he was getting so personal, like, you're not well prepared. Why does your government even send you here, et cetera, et cetera. And, I'm holding back the tears, just trying to look as self-confident as possible. And then I just, we have dinner plans, and I just assume they're going to be canceled. Okay. Like, I have nothing to say to him. And he came up to me after, like nothing had happened. Like, okay, see you at 7. And it dawned on me, like, this isn't about me. This is just a negotiating tactic. So it was just a lesson early on in my career not to personalize things. I always say, if you want to be a trade negotiator, no one's going to tell you you're doing a good job, right? No one. Okay, so you're putting together a proposal. The industry, the stakeholders, they always want more. Okay, Congress always wants their constituent to be taken care of. And even by the time you can put together a proposal that somehow satisfies everyone, and then you go overseas and you meet with your foreign counterpart, they hate what you're giving them. And then you start it all over again, because then you have to come back from that negotiating session, brief the industry, and they're like, what do you mean you didn't get what we wanted? In fact, we want more now. And it's just a cycle that goes on with very few people telling you, this is great. You did a really good job. We don't want any more. It never ends. So I think that's very important. The networking for sure is important. And I would just add this just one more tip that I share with women, both in the US and Asia, and more in Asia, this notion of like taking risks and seizing opportunities. I think people get very comfortable in what they're doing. And earlier on, it was mentioned, a lot of women in Asia in particular, there's so many home responsibilities, and the notion that they're going to take more on at work while their home responsibilities, either taking care of their children or their husband or their senior parents, is just overwhelming. And so a lot of times people get very comfortable and they don't want to move forward. But I think sometimes just taking that risk, taking that opportunity, and you realize, you know what, I can do this. I bring the right skills. I might not know everything for this next job, but I think there is a lot of importance to kind of just, when you hear something's available, not to think why you can't do it, but why you can.
Those are all great advice. We have a saying in Tagalog, Filipino, kapalan mukha, like get a thick face. And then my mom said, life is not fair. You're just going to have to work hard. But I do believe that network of community and women to get you through, because you can't do things alone and anything in life. So you'll need people and taking that risk. I must say, running for office was not something I had in mind or I was used to, or learning about these parties or anything like that, but just taking that leap. And like my cousin said, just learn from 0 to 100, you can do it. And I tell women this. Actually, I go to a lot of workshops and all these different things for women to get elected. And it's telling them like your perspective is needed, your leadership is needed, your style of leadership is needed. This is a new century, and there's a lot of things we need to adapt to, and we need new types of leadership. And I told them, this is what you need, and to give them the confidence. Sometimes there's this thing called imposter syndrome. And I was like, well, if your purpose is true and this is your goal, that kind of alleviates that, and you will start running and flying, and you will people will gravitate to you because of your why and what you're really seeking. And that's how you develop your team. And for APEC, the advice to APEC, I mean, she said so many great things about targeted data, inclusiveness, innovation. And I think for some of the things that I've heard is also said about us as the port. How transparent are we about our decision-making process? How inclusive are we really? Are we really listening? So some of the things when we do like our Northwest Clean Air Port strategy, or we include people that sometimes are the ones who keep us accountable or protest against us. And we listen to them. Like when we make policies and we make them part of it. And we write that down and we take the time, because sometimes they want to know that you're hearing this, that you're taking it into account. And it's not just about data, because sometimes we do need to meet one-on-one on people and have that relationship. So the transparency that we are including everyone, that's very important, or else we also get our own share of protesters at the port.
So if I could just give a little bit of advice on the APEC side of things, because I think one of the frustrations that everybody has about APEC is that it's a license to talk, and that nothing comes of it. And I think the interaction between the business community and APEC is super important, and it's making a lot of strides to get people to think about what it's like to participate in trade. I think one of the biggest frustrations for us in the US has been kind of every time you try and do something, you hit the cultural wall, and then, no, you can't do it this way because it's somehow a symbol of kind of US domination. So I think on the digital side in particular, if you can make some headway generally and then sell it as something that's very important for women and women entrepreneurs, then I think you'll have a lot more success. And I think probably you could be helpful, at least in the US. There seems to be now a debate about whether or not digital is good for economic growth. Sorry, yes, it is. But I think helping you help us might actually be a really important thing that APEC could do. So I don't know if there are questions from our friends in California, questions from the audience. Why don't we go ahead and open it up if there are questions from the audience? Please. I think they're going to give you a microphone. If you could introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm Tabitha Mallory. I run a consulting firm called the China Ocean Institute, and I teach at the University of Washington. So thank you so much for this great panel. My question is, as I was hearing all of you speak, it seems like the framing of this issue is still very much, women surviving or making it in a male-created world. And there are so many attributes of women, women's leadership, culture, values that I think are missing in the workplace. And so I'm curious what you all would like to see more of in the workplace, outside of what already exists from this, very top-down kind of male-created society. And then I think related to that is also thinking about the role of men here. So one of the things that somebody talked about was women in STEM, but we also have to think about men, for example, in the heal professions, like the health, education, arts, I forget what the L is. but these traditionally women-dominated sectors of the economy. And women, I think, have proved that we can make it, in these male-dominated sectors, but we haven't seen that same, the expansion of male in these other roles. So I'm wondering, any thoughts about that too? Thank you.
So great. So workplace and then the role of men in traditional. So Sherry, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I just have a few thoughts on that. So what I would like to see, I think women stereotypically, there's everybody's different, but bring a sense of community more, team empowerment. I'm always focused on helping my team be successful. And when they are, I am, and I get the benefit versus the other way around where it feels like men really want to be the best and compete against their team even at times. And so, a strong team, you just can't beat it, right? You've got a strong team and you're going to beat everybody else. And so I think that's one thing I'd like to see. And I also like to see more kindness. When you have people that care about each other as much as they care about the work they're doing, I think it's a powerful motivator to keep people moving forward together. And so I think more of that is a really powerful thing for any business, any government to have. So those are my thoughts.
Others?
I'll maybe chime in on the second part of your question. And Sherry touched on it a little bit earlier when she said the importance of advocacy for kind of men in the workplace and beyond and how they can help support. And I think also the importance of allyship as well, and kind of showing up, calling someone out for a behavior that isn't inclusive, helping someone who has great potential regardless of their gender. And I think also, something I sometimes see with my team is we have this big focus on small and underserved businesses. And people get frustrated sometimes with allyship. It's like they're not doing enough. They're doing something, but they're not doing enough. And so push for more, but also sometimes acknowledge like something is better than nothing. And the more we encourage that allyship, the we'll see more of it rather than kind of poking holes of like you're not being enough of an ally. And so I think that's something that's important, is how do we just continue to celebrate that allyship?
I guess it's because there has been a change at the Port of Tacoma. The current chair is a woman, my fellow Commissioner Keller, and I'm the vice chair. So the women are sort of ruling at the Port of Tacoma. And we've had more women in top positions lately being hired. And there's definitely did that DEI committee and inclusion. So there's new things happening at the port. But I do know that the maritime industry is very male dominated. There's new people coming in, and we want to expose and educate people from various social economic classes, but we know we need more women in this particular field. But the things that Sherry mentioned, kindness, compassion, we all being a team, that is what we value at the Port of Tacoma, not just the numbers. This is how we get things done as an organization. So sometimes people don't think that that's the number one thing, but that's what gets people motivated and wanting to do the work of the port.
And I think another point there that you hit on is like, it starts at the top.
Oh, yes.
And that's something we can all do, right? It starts at the top. If I can just add, kind of building on what the rest of you said, I think the importance of listening more and according respect to your colleagues and really listening to what they're saying. Because sometimes people are so quick to offer solutions to show that they're smart without really taking on board all of the various aspects of an issue or a problem.
So Rebecca, I don't know if we've gotten enough specifics for you for the women's meeting. If there's more that you think that you're going to try to accomplish, if you want to share that. I mean, we talked, I think, on our call about, setting standards of X number of women in your organization and all of that, and why that doesn't actually tell you much of anything. But are there some specifics without giving too many secrets for your dashboard that you want to share with us?
Doesn't matter. Yes, thank you very much. I think as soon as that dashboard is ready, I will and gets to the ministerial, we'll release it. So some really interesting findings on STEM, on access to finance, access to markets, some of our discriminatory laws, which economies are doing better than others. We don't do naming and shaming in APEC, but we do highlight areas where we can do better. So those things will definitely be shared. The other thing I wanted to point out is throughout all the meetings this year, I'm going to say it's this year because I've not seen it so much in the previous years. This year, the US has taken that extra step to make sure those voices are in the room. So, for example, when we had the transport, I'm speaking, sorry, when we had the transport ministerial, what we did was we had folks who were in logistics, businesses who were affected by policies in the room. So they had presentations to the ministers directly. So that was very good. Likewise, we're seeing this pattern being repeated in all the other ministerials where you have the private sector in. So, for example, for the health ministerial, we had some of the bigger companies in the room, as well as some associations in the room. So, often we are accused of only supporting big business. But let me just say that in the policy partnerships, we do have the voices of the others, academicians rather, researchers, civil society. So those things are happening, and they're happening at not just at the working level, that's very dominant in the working level, but also at the ministerial. So yeah, this year, more than any other year, you hear the voice of business. And for the trade ministers, when they met in May, they had a dedicated session with workers and your associations, your workers' unions, just to get them to understand that APEC is not just about big business. I think that's an important message. Maybe not much of that we haven't done enough of, but we're trying to do more along those lines.
I just ask Rebecca one more question before you sit down. Because this is one challenge, and I worked in APEC for a number of years, that it has, the practice is every year there's a different economy hosts. And sometimes there's continuity of the agenda between hosts. Other times it's kind of one-off. With respect to making APEC more inclusive, do you think this is something that can be institutionalized and continued beyond the US year, which you just commented it's kind of unique?
Yeah, I think what we did was in 2020, when we sat and thought through the new vision for APEC, inclusiveness, digitalization, innovation. We before that, we were very focused on trade and investment liberalization. Or if you look at the BOGO goals that we had for ourselves, then 2020 onwards, you would see that there is this focus more and more on sustainability, inclusive growth, and digitalization and innovation. So it's good to have a vision. We always say that. But what we did then in the New Zealand year, the vision was done during the Malaysia year. The New Zealand year, we said, okay, vision well and done, but we need to get this translated into some more concrete action. And so under New Zealand's leadership, we took it forward and had the Aotearoa Plan of Action, which has clear individual actions. You must understand APEC is non-binding, unlike the WTO, the World Trade Organization. So it's a lot of voluntary. But reporting is also voluntary. So you have individual action plans to meet all the statements that we've said, and collective action plans. That means, how do we do it collectively? So that first line of reporting will happen this year. So we're working on really pulling together all the different things that have been done and do a presentation to the ministers and the leaders this year. So that, put your money where your mouth is, essentially. And when Thailand hosted the following year, this is on continuity, you have all these three big areas: trade and investment, digitalization, innovation, and sustainability and inclusive growth. Thailand decided, yes, let's really focus. What have we not done enough of? And that's the sustainability part and inclusive growth. So working with Thailand and linking all these, and Thailand had the Bangkok goals for for the biocircular green economy, which really ties in these aspects that we were talking about. So from 2020 going forward, you will see that there is very focused effort on continuity to ensure that those conversations carry through. And this year, when we with the US, you can see that it's happening. You know, the issue of inclusive growth, women and the economy, women issues are discussed in every of the ministerials that we've had so far. And you can imagine that we will carry forward further. So yes, to your question, yes, we're learning. We're learning that it's, it used to be that we have those fancy deliverables, grand declarations every year. This year, you will see less of it, but more on what have we done so far. And I think that makes more sense. We were so wedded to statements and declarations. And this year, we're learning that it is not so easy. With the world has changed. The geopolitical elements are louder, the voices are louder. So we need to also pivot and see how we can be relevant and focus on what's important. And I think that's why you won't hear joint ministerial statements, declarations, but you will hear of work that's being done throughout the year. I think that's the change that you will see as we have to adjust to the realities of this world. The geopolitics has changed. We have to realize that, yes, there are those challenges outside, that those noises outside, but what are we really doing among ourselves, 21 of us? We have very important voices in the room. I mean, I don't think any other economy and any other body has China, Russia, US, Japan, Chinese Taipei in the room discussing all those tough issues very candidly. We don't always agree, but at least we hear each other out. And I think that's what's happening this year, more than any other year. That's okay. I'm done. I've earned my
Great. That seems like a perfect place to turn the program back to you all, unless you have some questions from California, or sorry, there are questions here.
Yeah, but then in audience. Right.
Jackie's always got a tough question.
No. So hi, Jackie Miller, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council here in Seattle. I'd like you all to talk about outcomes, if you could, for companies, for governments. Why does it make sense to make sure that there are women at the table and women in leadership? How do outcomes improve when women are at the table?
It's okay to follow on with a question. I'm Heather Wallach. I'm at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I would love to hear everyone's perspective on, it was kind of mentioned some of the structural aspects that particularly affect women in the economy, and that is things about family care. So the ability for women to make choices about when and how and whether to start a family. Paid parental leave, access to affordable and quality childcare, and flexible work opportunities. I would love just the general perspective on that factor of affecting women in the economy generally, but also with a specific lens to trade. How can we leverage trade policy or use trade policy to afford these goals for women?
Okay, we have like 3 minutes.
Sorry.
So I don't know, you want to start?
Sure. On my other hats, I am also a policy director and a lobbyist. And one of the things I lobby for, besides free school meals for kids, is the choice, as well as family leave and medical act. And I'm just going to say, it's not just in Asia that childcare and elder care is a burden on the women. It's here in this country. And so I don't know what APEC can do about that. I mean, that's a miracle, but I am glad that you are empowering women and that you're addressing climate change and sustainability, because that will affect, families, women, probably the most. And I would say the reason why we do focus on women, the same way why we have been focused on African Americans, because we need to unleash the economic power of women. When we do this, the economy will grow. That is the focus. There will be more innovation. Some of our most complex problems will be addressed and solved because we need to empower and have these women at the table, have them have the financial, the finance, the education, and you will see some of the things that is currently happening in the world will be addressed. And this is why we do focus on that. Because when you leave half of the world in the dark, it's really dim. I'm not the most eloquent on this, but I do believe that if we want a better economy, we do need to empower the women.
So I agree with all of that. Let me just add and respond to the question about, what do you do with the family challenges? And one of the things that an approach I think is very useful is exchanging experiences between different countries and what has worked and what hasn't worked. I mean, some of you will be surprised to learn, for example, that Japan has some of the best paternity leave policies in the world, but nobody uses it, right? Because there's a stigma to using it. But if you sit down with other countries where it's used, and they can come up with suggestions on how you could make this more attractive, or how you don't get penalized or looked at differently from your colleagues. So I'm a firm advocate, and I think here, like APEC provides an excellent forum for that, learning successes, but also learning what did not work. And particularly in East Asia, where Japan, Korea, and China are all facing demographic challenges, they're trying to encourage women to have more babies. Well, the women are looking at the shape of the economies, their responsibilities, and frankly, what they want to do with their lives. And they're putting off marriage, and some are deciding not to have kids. And this is very different. And so the governments are thinking, okay, we need to turn this around. But how do governments, what role can they play, and what kind of policies can they put in place? So that would be something, Rebecca, I'd suggest that it gets put on the APEC agenda if it's not already.
Oh gosh, we could talk about this stuff all day long. Yeah. Let me address your other question on the value. I mean, I wish I'd done more of my homework, but all the companies, there's been so many studies and consultants that have done the analysis of when you give women a voice, the value to a company goes up exponentially. And I just see it in my own team meetings, right? When you've got somebody that's sitting quietly, the typical guy won't call on them because they're not going to raise their hand and ask a question or share their thoughts. But if you call on them, Jackie, I really would love your thoughts on this. Do you have anything to add? And suddenly all this new innovative thinking comes out, and we have new ideas, and it spurs more new ideas and more people willing to ask questions or raise their hand. So the data is there. It's very, very powerful. Why US companies honestly don't use it more is a little disturbing to me, because we're still where we were a decade ago on advancing women into these roles. It's still the more aggressive guy seems to get the job more often than I think they should. So still got work to do, but the value is clear, and it's pretty compelling.
I think these ladies said it perfectly, but we will never realize our full economic or cultural potential without empowering our entire population, including the half of the population that are women.
And on that note, back to you, Margaret.
Let's hear it for all our speakers. Thank you so much, Wendy, Kristen, Sherry, Claire, our moderator, Dorothy, and Rebecca. You are all doing a million things, and it's so important for our audience to hear from you. So we are deeply grateful for you for taking the time. And thus, thank you also to Dorsey Whitney and Larry for this beautiful venue. At Asia Society, we have a number of programs coming up in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Seattle. As part of our Seeking Truth Through Facts US-China program series, we're doing an event on reporting on China. That's going to be a virtual program you're all invited to on August 28th. Japan Capitalism at Work, that will be in San Francisco. Seattle members will have virtual access. We have the head of the Asian Development Bank, Chantel Wong, coming to San Francisco on September 18th. And our big Seattle Center launch is going to be on September 12th. So stay tuned for those announcements. As a reminder, the APEC leaders and the CEO Summit will be descending upon San Francisco in November. So if you want to come hang out with us, you're all welcome to. If you're not already a member, please do join us. We're going to have QR codes up here on the screen for memberships and for a chance for a survey. So we'd love to hear from you. Thank you to our team, Man Wong here on the ground in Seattle. Thank you for pulling this amazing lineup together. And in Northern California, we have Nina, Christy, Jason, and Aaron. Thank you also to our interns and volunteers. Thank you again to our speakers. We have food outside, drinks on the ledge right behind you. And on behalf of Asia Society, Seattle and Northern California, thank you for joining us.